p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and tune-in apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Good evening, I'm back. This is Dewbs & Co with me, Emily Carver, in again for the wonderful Michelle to kickstart your Christmas weekend. Now, it looks like the UK government may be about to show a bit of bottle after that appalling, controversial and deeply unpopular bill was passed last night in the Scottish Parliament. It looks like maybe, just maybe, the UK government may actually be putting its foot down and gearing up for a court battle with the Scottish government. The legislation I'm talking about, of course, is the Gender Recognition Bill, which will allow men and women to self-declare their gender without any medical diagnosis after only living in the acquired gender for 3 months, whatever that means. And it'll allow children as young as 16 to legally change their gender. Now, I can't get my head around why on earth Nicola Sturgeon has done this. Most Scots don't want it. It dilutes what it means to be a woman, which I must say I find thoroughly offensive. It puts women and girls in danger, and it puts the rights of biological males above those of biological women. Absolute madness, in my view. So I'll be kicking off the show by asking my panel and you at home, should Westminster step up and block this lunacy? Perhaps sensible Scots might actually be quite pleased if they did. Also, Rishi Sunak said today the government has acted fairly when it comes to strikes and public sector pay. He's apparently sad and disappointed that strikes are threatening to disrupt Christmas. But is the government right to continue to dig in its heels over pay? Looks to me like they're starting to look a tad out of touch over the whole thing, but then again, some of the demands coming from the unions are quite simply unrealistic. Let me know what you think on that one. And if you're travelling to see relatives over the weekend, think again if you've got the sniffles. That's what we're being told by health officials this Christmas. People should stay clear of their elderly relatives to protect them from viruses. Seems rather inhumane to me. We have a loneliness pandemic in this country. I I'd hazard a guess that most elderly people would prefer to risk it than sit at home alone after the misery of lockdowns. And lastly, it is Christmas after all. Has the Christmas card had its day? Cards are getting more expensive, strikes are off-putting. Is it game over for that festive tradition? Now, apparently, the average person receives 17 Christmas cards per year. I certainly haven't received that many, have you? All of that to come tonight on Dewbs & Co with me, Emily Carver, and of course I'll be revealing my top-notch panel in just a few moments. But first, the latest news headlines. Stay tuned.
Emily, thank you. Good evening. It's 6:02. I'm Bethany Elsey in the GB newsroom. A woman and 2 men have been killed and several others injured after a gunman opened fire at a Kurdish community centre in Paris, prompting violent protests. Demonstrators clashed with police near to where the incident took place, expressing anger at the attack, which authorities believe could be racially motivated. The French president called the incident a heinous attack on the Kurdish community. A 69-year-old man has been detained after police have launched an investigation into murder, manslaughter and aggravated violence. It's understood the man was known to police and allegedly attacked a migrant camp last year. The Health Secretary's called the newly announced strikes by nurses on the 18th and 19th of January disappointing and says they're in no one's best interests. The Royal College of Nursing says the walkouts will go ahead unless the government opens negotiations over pay. Meanwhile, the GMP's called off a post-Christmas strike by ambulance workers in England and Wales. They'll now walk out on the 11th of January. The union's National Secretary, Rachel Harrison, thanked the public for their support.
The public are deeply worried about our NHS, and we are too. People across the country have been incredible in backing our members and NHS workers, and we care so much about them. That's why we are suspending the proposed GMB industrial action on the 28th of December. We know the public will appreciate being able to enjoy Christmas without any additional anxiety.
The Prime Minister's apologised for Christmas travel disruption as Border Force staff begin 8 days of strike action today.
What do we want? 10%! When do we want it? Now!
Heathrow, Gatwick, Birmingham, Cardiff, Glasgow and Manchester airports are being affected, but Heathrow claims it's operating as normal. Military personnel and volunteers from the civil service have been trained to step in. Rishi Sunak insists public sector pay must be controlled to keep down inflation.
First of all, I'm really sad and I'm disappointed about the disruption that is being caused to so many people's lives, particularly at Christmas time. What I'm trying to do is make the right long-term decisions for the country, for everybody's benefit. And I think we all know that the major economic challenge we all face now is inflation. It's inflation that's eating into everyone's pay packets, it's rising the cost of living, and I want to make sure that we reduce inflation. Part of that is being responsible when it comes to setting public sector pay.
GB News understands airlines are facing millions of extra fuel costs as they deal with likely long delays during the Border Force strike. British Airways is one of a number of airlines instructing its pilots to take on additional fuel to help cope with holding in the skies for up to an extra hour. A senior aviation source said the contingency plans were essential but extremely costly. The Prime Minister says it's completely reasonable for the UK government to consider blocking new gender legislation in Scotland. Rishi Sunak's comments come after MSPs voted yesterday to pass the Gender Recognition Reform Bill. It lowers the age when people can apply to change their legal gender from 18 to 16. It also removes the need for a medical diagnosis. Holyrood has warned any attempted intervention from the UK government will be vigorously contested. A powerful Arctic storm is sweeping across large parts of the US and Canada, with temperatures plunging as low as -45 degrees. Experts are warning exposure to bare skin could lead to frostbite within minutes. More than 100 million people are under weather alerts during the busiest travel days of the year. The storm is forecast to develop into what's being described as a bomb cyclone, bringing with it heavy, blinding snow. Motorists are being warned to expect long delays as millions hit the road to spend Christmas with friends and family. The AA says today will be the busiest day of the festive period, with an estimated 17 million journeys being made across the UK. A strike tomorrow by thousands of RMT members working at Network Rail is expected to make matters worse. The walkout will last until the 27th of December. And George Cohen, part of England's 1966 World Cup winning team, has died at the age of 83. Cohen played every minute of the victorious campaign on home soil and in total won 37 caps for his country. His former club, Fulham, announced his death this morning. We're on TV, online and DAB+ radio. This is GB News. Now let's get back to Dewbs & Co with Emily.
Thank you very much. Welcome to Dewbs & Co with me, Emily Carver. Now I'll introduce my panel for this evening. We've got Paul Embry, who is a fireman, a trade unionist and an author, and David Curtin, who is the leader of the Heritage Party. Now, remember, I also want to know your thoughts throughout the show on all of those issues that I introduced just then on that gender recognition bill from Scotland. Should Westminster step in and block it? Or would that perhaps be playing into Nicola Sturgeon's hands? I'm not sure on that one. Get in touch with me, gbviews at gbnews.uk, or on Twitter at gbnews. So, I want to kick things off with something that has been puzzling and enraging me in equal measure. Just as I said, we've been reporting all week from Scotland, where Nicola Sturgeon's SNP has passed a hugely controversial bill, to say the least. The bill will allow men, women and teenagers as young as 16 to self-identify as the opposite gender without any need for a medical diagnosis. Now there's talk, though, that the UK government could step in and block the legislation. The Prime Minister has said that the government is taking a close look at the bill, and the Secretary of State for Scotland, Alistair Jack, has issued a statement raising the possibility that he could invoke powers to block the bill from going for royal assent and essentially take the Scottish government to court. David, should we be calling on the government to block this bill?
Yeah, absolutely. It's an insane bill, and not many people in Scotland actually want it. It seems that the Scottish Parliament has been taken over by a group of cultural Marxists who are in hock to some very, very aggressive trans activists, which are small in number, and they want to impose their will on the rest of society and just completely change what are societal norms. Look, there are two sexes, male and female, and your sex is determined, your biological sex is determined by your anatomy and by your chromosomes. But over the last 50 or 60 years, people have developed this concept of gender that was introduced by some really crazy academics in the 1950s. And this idea has been mainstreamed, that there's something called gender that is different to biological sex. So there's not two genders, there's 100 different genders, but you can change your gender whenever you want. And now you've got the Scottish Parliament saying, well, whenever you decide, even if you're 16 or over, you can say that you're male if you're actually female, or female if you're actually male. The whole thing doesn't make any sense to anyone with a sound mind. So if the government in Westminster can overturn this, good for them. They should do it.
Do you think that sex and gender are two different things, Paul?
Well, I mean, I
Bit
don't...
of a controversial question.
It is a controversial question. I mean, sex for me is immutable, biological sex. I mean, when, as you said in the introduction, people, in order to obtain a gender recognition certificate, are told they have to live within that gender for a certain amount of time. Well, what does that actually mean? What does it mean to say, in order to prove that you're a woman, you have to live as a woman for 3 months or whatever.
Does it mean wear a dress and lipstick?
This is the thing. Do you wear pink? Do you wear your hair in plaits? Do you play with dolls? I mean, surely the whole point of breaking down those gender stereotypes is that women and girls weren't categorised in that way and could actually move into occupations, industries, hobbies, pastimes that once upon a time were denied to them because they were told, well, no, these things are for boys and men. And my fear really, Emily, is women's struggle over recent decades where women have genuinely fought for equality, they've fought for privacy, they've fought for security in public spaces, in the workplace and so on, is in danger, I think, of being unpicked. All of those advancements that women won are in danger of now unravelling as a result of what I see as a barking mad piece of legislation, which ultimately as David said, renders the whole concept of womanhood effectively meaningless.
Well, that's
what it does.
That's what pains me the most out of all of this, not just the safety concerns or the privacy concerns, as you mentioned, is just fundamentally diluting what it means to be a woman. If you are legally a woman because you have essentially worn a dress for 3 months or whatever else that shows you are female in gender, suddenly, according to the law, you are a woman on equal footing with a woman in many, many ways. That just seems absolutely absurd. But some people liken this whole thing to the campaign for gay rights. Do you think those two are comparable?
No, I think it's an insult to gay people, actually, who fought for liberation, who fought for equality for so long, to say that actually this is exactly the same thing. It's clearly not the same thing at all. I think there are clearly here... First of all, you know, as I said, it renders a concept of womanhood meaningless. But also, as a husband and a father, the idea that I would want my daughter to be in a public space, in a changing room, for example, and somebody who is clearly still a biological male, but decides on a particular day to declare himself to be a woman, and therefore thinks that he has the right to access those spaces. I mean, I think any ordinary husband and father is going to be concerned about that, about the impact on women's safety and security.
Well, I mean, thank goodness for people like J.K. Rowling and Helen Joyce and people who have stood up against what I think, and I think we can all agree, is total madness. But coming back to the issue of Nicola Sturgeon and what butting in from Westminster might do you think that would... How do you think that would go down in Scotland?
Well, she would play it politically and she would say, well, this is England, Westminster interfering with Scotland, therefore there's a case for Scottish independence. But I think we've got to look at this issue separately. This is nothing to do with Scottish independence. This is about the fundamental reality and nature of humanity and what we are as men and women. And this is more important than, you know, worrying about what Nicola Sturgeon might say about Scottish independence. If we have the power to use to stop this, and I think maybe we need to save Scotland at this point.
Well, I think a lot of Scots would be happy.
Yeah.
May I just... We're getting some very interesting emails in from you at home, so I'm just going to read out a couple and we can react to those. Gareth in Bridgend says, I suspect Sturgeon has rushed this bill through, knowing Westminster would react negatively. This gives Sturgeon the perfect launchpad to tell Scots, how dare they? We need independence to make our own decisions. I'd agree with you, Gareth, if it weren't for the fact that most Scots don't seem to support this bill.
Well, this is the thing. I mean, there's a danger here that Nicola Sturgeon, in her rush to prove herself to be, you know, the most radically progressive leader in Scotland, and the SNP, the most radically progressive party, have overplayed their hand to some degree, because I can't imagine that people in Scotland are actually that much different to people in England.
No.
I suspect a lot of people in Scotland are probably looking at this kind of stuff, mainstream voters in Scotland, and thinking, hold on a second, this does not resonate with me. I've got real concerns about this. Because it seems to me to have been a fringe issue for some years now. It seems to have been a very vocal but well-organised minority.
Very well-organised.
Who are, you know, claiming prejudice, claiming discrimination, and actually the argument that trans people are some of the most discriminated against in our society is fundamentally not true, actually. When you look at the stats, it's not actually true.
People talk about how hate crimes against transgender people have risen.
But that's explained by improved kind of reporting methods and more social awareness and things like that. And there are no, actually, when you think about it, there are no rights that trans people don't have that other people have. So we need to kind of get this in perspective. And I'm not sure, actually, how we say that other forms of cultural appropriation are unacceptable. But when it comes to women, we say, no, it's absolutely fine to don a dress and to wear high heels and to wake up one morning and to say, I'm a woman and I know what it's like to be a woman. But when we talk about blackface, for example, people say that's completely unacceptable. Why do we make an exemption for women? Why do we say that it's so meaningless that anybody can just become a woman?
Well, it's just totally playing into stereotypes, isn't it? Which is what feminists wanted to change. Now, very interestingly, Judith, a Scottish woman, she says, as a Scottish woman, Sunak must stop this bill. Marion says, please, GB News, can you stand up for the rights of women, children and parents and put pressure on Suella Braverman and the British government to end this transgender law without any safety amendments? So, There's a Scottish
Yeah,
woman.
Absolutely. I mean, well, these people, Suella Braverman particularly, says she wants to stand up against wokery. I actually was at a speech in 2019 at the Bruges Group where she actually mentioned cultural Marxism for the first time. Suella Braverman said that in a speech. She's said for many, many years she wants to fight this and stand up for it. Well, this is your time, Suella Braverman. This is your time, Rishi Sunak. I mean...
To be fair to Suella, she's got a lot on her plate.
Yeah, true, but, I mean, well, whoever's got to make the decision...
Yeah, I think Kemi Badenoch has already spoken out.
This is a party, the Conservative Party in Westminster, that has been so non-conservative, so anti-conservative, really, I think, for most of the 12 years it's been in power since the 2010 elections. But they always, protest that they are actually really genuine conservatives. This is a chance to actually do something that is really conservative.
Well, there you go. You heard it from David.
I have to say, I've got no faith in the Conservative Party. I mean, we hear noises off sometimes. We hear the likes of Suella Braverman stand up against it. But actually, in terms of the kind of wokery that we're seeing embedded within our society now, when was it introduced? It was introduced during a Conservative government. I mean, the Tories have been in power for the last 12 years or whatever it is, and actually that kind of hyper-progressive agenda has seeped deeper and deeper into our society, and they've been in charge. So they haven't pushed back against it, as far as I can see. Whenever they're called upon to challenge some of the more radical things that are implemented in our society, they never really do so.
To be fair, though, in Scotland, Labour have been totally 100% complicit, by the sounds of it, with this bill going through. They don't seem to have stood up. I've seen the likes of J.K. Rowling pleading with the Labour Party to actually stand up against this bill because there aren't enough Conservatives up in Scotland to do so, as we've seen.
Part of that, Emily, is because, look, the truth is we have got a generation of politicians these days who are absolutely petrified of saying no to a vocal minority who are claiming prejudice and discrimination. And sometimes you do have to say it, particularly in a case like this, where the rights that are being demanded are likely to impact in a negative way on the rights of other groups of people. You have to say, on this occasion, do you know what? You're wrong. We're not going to accept it. We're not going to do what you want. But because we've got politicians who are petrified of being called nasty names on Twitter, they haven't got the backbone to do it. That's the truth of it.
Well, it's quite interesting what Adrian here said to David in Sheffield. He says, the Scots need to know the power is in their hands. If they agree with the woke insanity, vote SNP. If they don't, then find an alternative candidate. So essentially, I think what he's saying is that SNP have proven themselves that they are insane in this respect, in Adrian's words, and therefore that might force a change of government. So perhaps it's a good thing.
I hope so. Unfortunately, the last Scottish elections were, I think, 2021, isn't it? So there's not going to be any more elections in the Scottish Parliament until 2026. So they've got a long time to wait. I mean, so actually with this, it's really got to be the case that the Westminster government intervenes now because there isn't a chance to vote them out for another 4 years. And when that happens, I hope, well, there'll be new parties standing. We will be standing in Scotland and making a change.
Quick word from you before we go to some more social.
The Westminster government may have no option but to intervene, because if it can be demonstrated that this law in Scotland clearly does contradict laws, UK-wide laws, in terms of the Equality Act 2010, for example, they will have to intervene. Their hand will be forced on it.
To give some balance from the other point of view is that many people who have campaigned for this change would argue that the Equality Act protects women, even with this legislation, insofar as places are allowed to still be divided in terms of sex. So you can still have prisons that are based on sex, not gender, and so on and so forth. But the problem is that so many institutions are indoctrinated with this ideology that they don't wish to be sex-based anymore, as we saw with what happened when J.K. Rowling said that she was opening up a women-only refuge for only biological women. She got a lot of heat for that. Jeff has said the reason she and her misguided following have pushed this legislation through is so that she can claim interference from the UK government when they stop it. I think that's a good point, but of course the Scots don't support it either, at least the majority don't. Gary says it's obvious that Sturgeon has purposefully chosen a bill that Westminster is likely to overturn. Again, she can then claim that Scotland is unable to pass its own laws and therefore engineer support for another referendum. I mean, it's a compelling argument, but I'm not sure in the case of this bill, because this is a deeply controversial and disliked bill. Janine says, would you be happy if your wife or daughter, whilst in a women-only changing room shower, was confronted by a naked biological man asserting that he was a woman? No, I don't think I would be happy. I don't have a daughter yet, but I certainly wouldn't be happy. I think a lot of men are worried for their daughters, actually.
Yeah, and they have every right to be. And, you know, I do wonder how many of these MSPs who voted the legislation through do have young daughters. I suspect not many of them do, because if they did have, I think they would have probably thought about it a little bit harder.
I think ideology just blinds people.
Maybe, and as I said, you know, cowardice in terms of being called nasty names. But I think it's an entirely legitimate thing to say, look, as the father of a child, a female daughter, I do not want my daughter to be compelled to share what, in my view, should be a single-sex space for women with biological men, regardless of however they identify. It shouldn't happen, and I would stand against it, and I think most fathers would in this country.
I'm very sorry, I'm not going to be able to come back to you on this one, because coming up, Rishi Sunak has said the government has been fair and reasonable over strikes, but they don't seem to be going away. Stay tuned, we'll get stuck into that.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you know, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Yes, welcome back to Dewbs & Co. with me, Emily Carver. With me until 7, my fabulous panel, Paul Embry, who is a fireman, trade unionist and author, and David Curtin, who is the leader of the Heritage Party. Now, we've still got lots of emails and tweets coming through on the gender recognition bill, whether Westminster should butt in and try to block this bill from going through in Scotland that would allow men to self-identify as women and vice versa. Chris says, hopefully the shameful move by Nicola Sturgeon and her cronies to diminish women's rights and put women and girls at increased risk of violence will be the start of the end for her in politics. I mean, we did talk about Boris Johnson as being Teflon man, but she does seem to be Teflon woman. Kenny says, I'm Scottish and I hate the mad SNP. I think you speak for a lot of Scots. You know, I'm half Scottish myself, and I must say a lot of my family up there certainly are not fans of Miss Sturgeon. They call her all sorts of names, which I won't repeat on the television. Nigel says, no, we should not intervene. It's playing into Sturgeon's hand. Let her make herself unpopular with the Scottish electorate. Then they'll boot her out. Yes, it's a good point, but we do have a little while to go before that's even a possibility. And there are a lot of people who just are obsessed with independence up in Scotland who will vote for her, whatever she does. It seems, at least, and she's very good at spin. She is, that woman. Anyway, we're going to be moving on to strikes. I know you're all bored of strikes, but there is quite a lot going on, and I want to know your view on whether Rishi Sunak is handling this all correctly, or if he's coming across perhaps as a little bit arrogant. He says the government has been fair and reasonable on public sector pay, but however fair and reasonable he's been, the strikes, of course, show no signs of dying down. The ambulance service has called off strikes on the 28th of December because of Christmas, and they're worried about how that looks. But they will be going ahead with walkouts in January, along with nurses and maybe even doctors. So let's have a listen to what Sunak had to say earlier today.
I'm really sad and I'm disappointed about the disruption that is being caused to so many people's lives, particularly at Christmas time. You know, when it comes to, let's be honest, it's a difficult question of setting public sector pay. The government has acted fairly and reasonably in accepting all the recommendations of the public sector pay review bodies. That's an independent process that government has listened to.
Paul, does your heart melt when you hear that Rishi Sunak is sad and disappointed?
My heart never melts when I see Rishi Sunak on the television, I have to say.
Doesn't he look so sweet standing there in the soup kitchen or wherever he is?
Looks can be deceptive because he may look sweet on the surface, but underneath, I think the actions that his government are taking, or the lack of action, I should say, that his government are taking in relation to these strikes are causing a lot of misery, a lot of
What should he be doing?
I think, as government, you need to intervene. We've got to a point, I think, in these strikes where when it has such an impact on the country and the ability of the country to function, you know, whether it's the health service, whether it's the transport system, whether it's the emergency services and so on, I think any government needs to get a grip of the situation and say, actually, if we need to intervene in order to make sure there's more money on the table for some of these essential workers to have a decent pay increase and so that they don't experience some of the problems that are being, you know, as a result of the cost of living crisis, people struggling to pay their mortgages, their energy bills, worrying about if they can afford Christmas presents for their children and so on. The government has got the wherewithal to intervene in that way if it chooses to do so, but it's chosen not to do so. And in my view, this anger is not going to go away. The anger that led to these strikes isn't going to dissipate anytime soon.
But we haven't exactly known Rishi Sunak for his fiscal restraint over the course of the pandemic. He's now desperately trying to convince the public that he can handle the public finances, get inflation under control. David, where's the balance here?
Well, I mean, that's the point, isn't it? I mean, much of the problem is Rishi Sunak's fault because he was so fiscally irresponsible over the 2 years of the lockdown period. Billions and billions going into contracts and we don't know where the things bought in the contracts.
Well, this keeps reoccurring, the contracts.
Yeah, huge waste of money. He borrowed £400 billion plus. So that's that's baking in 10, 20, 25% to inflation. We got inflation this year of 10%. Now, normally I would be, being on the right of politics, I would immediately and automatically, knee-jerkingly say, no, the unions are wrong, strikes are wrong. But actually, in this case, I can see the point. Because Rishi Sunak has messed up so much with the economy, because we got 10% inflation now, if you give workers a pay rise of less than 10%, when there's 10% inflation, they have a real terms pay cut.
Well, it's
true. And the
true.
MPs are getting a pay rise, the pensioners have got a pay rise, welfare people have got a pay rise. He's spending loads of money, splashing out money to Ukraine, on migrant hotels, on diversity officers, on foreign aid. But people are saying, well, what about the workers in this country?
But I do worry about the other workers, those working in the private sector who aren't getting inflation-busting pay rises necessarily.
I'd say, just quickly, he's only responsible, really, for negotiating for workers who are employed in the public sector.
No, I know, but the other workers have to pay for it all, do they not, Paul?
Well, I think I don't think necessarily.
We're being taxed more and more and more.
I don't think necessarily they do. I think there's huge scope, for example, for a wealth tax, which could bring in billions of pounds from the richest people within society, progressive taxation.
What do we do next year? You tax wealth.
Well, hopefully
it's smaller next year. There's less wealth to tax.
Well, hopefully inflation won't be next year what it is this year. But let's be blunt, Emily. The super rich have always put up arguments against being taxed more. They always claim that they'll take their funds and their wealth abroad. And for me, that's holding the country to ransom in a way that union members are often accused of holding the country to ransom. So You know, it's funny, isn't it, how we can find billions of pounds at the drop of a hat during lockdown, for example, for furlough schemes. We can find billions of pounds to go to war for, the next military escapade whenever we need it. We can find billions of pounds when it's needed. But when it comes to a crucial situation
Well, we can't
like
always have wartime, emergency time spending. That's just ludicrous.
I mean, Tony Benn always used to say, why is it that we can, he was a serviceman in the Second World War. He always used to say, how was it we could find millions of pounds to employ young men to put on a uniform to go and kill Germans, but we can't find it when we need people to build hospitals, when we need nurses, when we need to give people a decent pay increase, when we need people to build the roads and the schools and so on. So I think it's about priorities. I think it's about saying, well, if you can do those things when you need to, why is it you can't do it in order to be able to fund a decent pay increase for people? And the other thing I would say, Emily, is, look, we're in a recession now, and that recession could be long and it could be deep. And it will be longer and deeper if people have got less disposable income. If we say to people, look, we're going to hold down your pay because we're worried about inflation. Well, that's all very well. But what happens when it prolongs and deepens the recession because there's a lack of demand in the economy? Where's the growth going to come from?
But we need
Where's the recovery going to come from?
We need to
It's a key point.
rethink, this is controversial perhaps, rethink some of those very generous public sector pensions, because, I don't know,
They've already been rethinked.
Perhaps some people might, prefer more upfront pay and forego some of their pension liabilities, perhaps. People are very divided on this at home, David. Richard Barcock says the government has not acted fairly with the unions, it has acted arrogantly. But Sue says most definitely Sunak should abstain from the ridiculous militant union demands. I'm just hoping he won't have another U-turn. He needs to carry on and ignore them. So there you go. GB viewers are very much divided.
Yeah, I mean, some of the demands are ridiculous. I mean, the nurses are asking for 19%, which is twice inflation.
But they'll negotiate on that, won't
yeah,
they?
OK.
We know that.
Well, that's the thing. I think with
I don't know. They've rejected it in Scotland.
But, they need to come to some sensible agreement. Well, I understand with the rail workers, Unite have actually accepted an agreement, but Mick Lynch and the RMT have refused the agreement that one of the unions has accepted. So there is an issue there. I mean, why can't they all get together and accept the pay offer that's been made? Then we could solve the rail strikes.
I just worry that our government is hopeless at creating an environment or fostering an environment where there's lots of economic growth, because that's what we need to fund our public services, and that's what we haven't had, or at least we've had very slow, stagnant growth for so long.
Well, it's true. We do need.
And if you tax people too much, then you lose that, unfortunately.
No, look, I'm not suggesting you tax people until the pipsqueak, as a former Labour Chancellor Dennis Healey once said. But I do think there is definitely scope for a progressive taxation system which takes more from the rich and the super rich in this country.
We do have a progressive tax system.
But it's not progressive enough. And I think there's scope for a wealth tax, which, as I said, would bring in billions of pounds in one hit in order to fund public services. And some of these arguments, I think, need to be made because, this has not come out.
But, Paul, I fundamentally think you're wrong, because I've looked at wealth taxes with an open mind, and they have been implemented in various different guises in countries like France. What happened? The very rich people left. They hid their assets. It was a bureaucratic nightmare because they tried to analyse, the wealth of people down to their paintings that were in their house.
We go after them then, don't we? If they are exploiting loopholes and if they are finding a way not to pay tax when they are much richer than the rest of us, then we don't turn a blind eye and say, OK, they'll threaten to hide their assets, so therefore we shouldn't do it. If that was an ordinary Joe on the street who was embezzling social security payments, they would have their collar felt.
I'd rather we focused on lifting people up rather than redistribution, but that's an ideological point.
Yeah, I would totally diverge from Paul on this. I think we could agree that workers should have a fair pay deal, but to fund that, it shouldn't come from wealth taxes because, as you say, Emily, if you increase tax on the highest earners, they just go abroad. You're going to get less rather than more. Actually, if you decrease the top rates of tax, there's one thing I do agree with Liz Truss on. I don't agree with much. By reducing the 45% rate of tax to 40%, you'd actually get more tax in the long run because people will work harder because they're more motivated to earn more, and then they would actually, ironically, pay more more.
The problem is it's just so politically toxic for obvious reasons.
That's always used. But
very quickly, Paul.
Tell me this, David. Why is it that when a union member goes on strike, they are often accused by people on the right and the newspapers of holding the country to ransom, and yet in the scenario that you just pitched there, a rich person who's told that he or she has to pay more tax, oh fine, I'm going to flee the country, I'm going to take my capital elsewhere. Why is that not holding the country to ransom?
Well, we've seen doctors going to Australia
How
and
is
New
that
Zealand.
not holding the country to ransom?
Well, they're free to do so. You got. Do you want capital control?
So
if you have capital controls, there's no freedom whatsoever.
So what you're saying is we indulge the demands of the rich whenever they threaten to move their assets and their wealth and their capital abroad. We say we need these people too much.
No, it's just a fact of life,
when it's a nurse or a railway worker or a firefighter taking strike action, we say, oh, they're holding the country to ransom.
Well, I haven't said that, and I'm on the right. I'm actually agreeing with you on that the workers should have a fair wage. But what my point is,
very quickly,
the
David,
curve means that if you decrease taxes for the richest, they actually pay more.
The Laffer curve was debunked years ago. He wrote it on the back of a napkin in a New York restaurant.
I'm going to have to butt in. No more Laffer curve, although I do really enjoy this disagreement here. Let me know what you think. Do you think wealth taxes are a good idea? Would they be able to pay for pay rises in the public sector, or do you think they're a nonsense and won't work? Tried and tested, never work. Anyway, we're going to have to move on. Coming up, will you avoid your elderly relatives if you have a touch of the sniffles? Seems rather inhumane to me, but that's what public health officials are saying. Stay tuned.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dewbs & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
Why not take us home with you by visiting the GB News shop at gbnews.store? You'll find all the official merchandise, a really good present actually for yourself, your friends or your family.
We ship across the UK mainland at no extra cost. GB News, the People's Channel.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Yes, welcome back to Dewbs & Co. with me, Emily Carver. With me until 7, my panel, Paul Embry is a fireman, trade unionist and author, and David Curtin, who's the leader of the Heritage Party. Now, lots of you have been getting in touch throughout the show. Paul says, wealth tax to fund strikers' wages. I feel like I'm reliving the 1970s. That ended well. Oof.
Well, actually, in the 1970s, most families could get by on the wages of a single wage earner. Most people could afford a house, a car, a decent holiday. So the 70s weren't great, but actually I think some people, considering the financial plight they're experiencing at the moment, wouldn't mind turning the clock back, to be honest.
Well, I'm not sure about that. 3-day weeks and all. And outages, power outages, rubbish on the streets, although perhaps that's what we're heading for this winter. Cynthia says, whilst I agree everyone should have the right to strike for their better wages, I ask the question, why now? What have the people in this country done to deserve to have Christmas taken from them again? Sunak should carry on as he is. It's not fair for people like us who haven't seen their grandchildren for 2 years. And Paul says, another Paul, when workers have suffered austerity, pandemic and the MPs voting themselves large pay rises, why shouldn't they ask for rises that keep up with inflation? Meanwhile, our various prime ministers strut the world stage, giving our money away. Yes, perhaps it is a question of political priorities, but I do have my eye on that extreme debt burden that this country is suffering, and we need to get it. We need to get it down somehow. Just very quickly, we've also got emails still coming through on the gender recognition bill in Scotland. Should Westminster butt in and try and block it? Jerry says, I may not agree with the gender bill, but I also strongly disagree with Westminster butting in on our affairs. Fair enough. I mean, it's one more argument for Scottish independence, if you were that way inclined. It would show that Westminster can't keep its thoughts to itself, at least. Anyway, we're going to move on to a news story. Health officials aren't giving up on telling us what to do in this first COVID-free Christmas for several years. They're warning that if you have a cold or a cough, you should avoid visiting elderly relatives altogether during the festive season. This is because there's been a surge in winter viruses, putting hospital wards under huge pressure. I mean, it does seem like when I've been travelling in on the train that absolutely everyone on the carriage that I happen to be in is suffering from some kind of cough, sneeze, flu-like symptoms. Do you think public health officials should just butt out a bit when it comes to these basic decisions?
This is the nanny state in action again, isn't it? I think most people are adults and should be treated like adults, and everybody knows if you got a bad cough, a bad cold, you feel bad and ill, you stay at home and you don't sneeze on people and you don't cough on people. People don't need to be told that. It's something that people would just do anyway, and the people that, you know, are going to be inconsiderate and do it anyway are not going to listen to an announcement from the UK Health Security Agency, as they say. I mean, they just need to, stop treating us like kids.
You know, I do worry, Paul, that, you know, this is an excuse for unsociable and uncaring family members to say, oh, no, we're not going to visit Granny. Sorry, we can't visit you because we've got a little cough. And we've got a loneliness pandemic in this country. And, you know, some people are looking for any excuse not to go visit their relatives, perhaps.
And I suspect many elderly people would themselves oppose this edict for, as you say, reasons of loneliness, for reasons of the fact that over the last 3 years, because of lockdown and so on, many of them wouldn't have seen their relatives as often as they otherwise might have done. I think the issue of loneliness at Christmas is a serious one. I can't imagine many elderly people who, given the choice of spending Christmas alone watching the TV by themselves and having relatives come to see them, albeit those relatives might have a sniffle, would say, well, no, I'm happy to spend Christmas alone. Do we ever consult elderly people when we make these sort of recommendations?
No, it's just
I don't think we do.
You know, these higher powers, these so-called experts, giving their one-sided view that only views things in terms of, you know, viruses.
And I think there's a danger where, you know, we've got a culture where we find it almost impossible now to quantify risk in a sensible way. Life is sometimes a risk. Sometimes you do things that are risky, but you do it because A, it's worthwhile, B, there might be a benefit in doing so. If this kind of safetyism that has seeped into our society, where if anything presents a risk, you will have somebody in authority somewhere saying, don't do it. Actually, I think that leads to a kind of very unadventurous, sterile, fragmented and atomised society.
I remember, I think it was in the New Labour years, if we use political terms to describe different eras, when the whole health and safety stuff came about, and always the front page of the Daily Mail or something would be about the madness that is health and safety. But may I just say, Annie in Norwich, she said quite the reverse of what we've been saying. She said, I'd rather be alone with TV and the cat than be surrounded by coughing, snivelling friends and family. I don't want to catch a cold, flu or COVID just to eat a glorified roast lunch. Well, Annie, you don't sound too cheerful, but that's the point of view.
Yeah, that's up to her. That's totally up to her, isn't it?
Yes.
And different people are going to approach things in different ways. Absolutely. The government should butt out and stop trying to tell people to do what to do and micromanaging people's lives. Really, you got Annie there. She wants to be alone at Christmas. Fine. Enjoy the television. Enjoy a roast chicken or something. I mean, other people might be happy with their sneezing relatives.
Yes, I don't know how old Cynthia. I don't know how old Cynthia is. But I don't think it was Cynthia, actually. I think it was Annie. I can't remember.
I would push back a little bit against, you know, the idea that there is an health and safety culture which is completely unnecessary. I mean, I think actually in the workplace there have been, over recent decades, there have been health and safety laws that have been introduced absolutely correctly in my view, and which ultimately have saved lives, where workers have been given decent protections that they didn't previously have, you know, proper personal protective equipment and so on. And yes, some people will dismiss that as red tape and bureaucracy and completely unnecessary. Actually, some red tape is important. I mean, the best example I could use is Grenfell Tower, where there wasn't enough red tape, and as a result of the lack of red tape, things were allowed to happen to that tower, which ultimately resulted in dozens of deaths. So red tape is sometimes necessary, and we shouldn't always reject it.
I don't think one should be too ideological about all red tape and all regulations, certainly not, but there certainly needs to be a balance. David, sorry, we're just going to have to go to some of these brilliant comments I'm getting in. Ian says, after the COVID scandal, these health officials should keep their expert opinions to themselves. And Winston says, not see my elderly relatives, never. They've all said they'd rather be dead. I took my gran out and I'm looking after her myself. I'll never be held hostage by these people again.
Absolutely. I mean, it was appalling what's happened in the last 2 years. I mean, we saw people stuck in care homes, not allowed to see their relatives, you know, basically living a prison-like existence for weeks and months on end because of regulations that we now know are unnecessary. And one of the things that they did say in this is not just about isolating yourself. They were saying you should wear masks again if you.
Oh yes, I saw that. Yes.
You've got any kind of cough or cold or whatever. Look, I mean, the whole idea of wearing masks to stop transmission of a virus, that's been debunked. You don't need it. It doesn't do anything. It's just maybe a mental blanket over your face. It's more for your mind than actually to do anything medical or scientific.
Also,
transmission. So let's just give up the whole idea of putting masks back, please.
To those at home, you do only live once, so, you know, you have to take a bit of risk in your life, surely. But be sensible. Don't cough over your elderly relatives or one another anyway.
Especially not Annie.
Especially not Annie. Coming up, do you still send a Christmas card? I haven't received very many. A few work ones, maybe one from my mum, but not from all my friends. At least fewer people are doing it these days. Do you think the annual tradition is on its last legs?
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents. Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us. We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing!
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
Yes, welcome back to Dewbs & Co with me, Emily Carver. Let me reintroduce my panel for the last section of this evening's show. Paul Embry, who's a fireman, trade unionist and an author, and David Curtin, of course, who's the leader of the Heritage Party. I'm just going to go to a few of your responses, your emails, your tweets before we get on to our final conversation about Christmas cards. I haven't received many, sadly. Have you? We've seen on the issue of public health advice about how we shouldn't visit elderly relatives if we've got a cough or a sniffle. Cynthia says, here we go again, protect the NHS. If the NHS was run properly and stopped wasting money, paid those who work for them a decent wage and got rid of managers, it might work. Strong stuff there from Cynthia. I think you sent in another email, actually, on something else. Thank you for tuning in. Right, we're going to move on to our final topic. It's the annual Christmas tradition that often prompts a few groans. Signing potentially hundreds of Christmas cards to send out to friends, acquaintances and loved ones, and paying for the stamps. But is the sending of Christmas cards dying out? More and more people are using other means of communication, of course, to send a Christmas message. And the postal strikes aren't helping either. Paul, where do you stand on this great Christmas card tradition? Have you received many?
I've received a few, but because of the postal strikes, probably not as many as I would normally have received. And my brother's one of those postal workers, so I'll blame him. Or it might be that nobody sent me any this year, and that could be it, possibly. No, I think that we're abandoning traditions in this country at a pretty rapid rate. I tend to think that this is one of those small traditions that we should stick with rather than dispense with.
Like carols.
I quite like the idea. Look, you know, whether people celebrate Christmas or not, I quite like the idea that in this fast-moving world, with all the technology at our fingertips in terms of emails and social media and so on, that to send a Christmas card, you actually need to buy a card from the shop, sit down, spend time writing it, put your own personal message in it in your own handwriting.
How romantic.
And take it to the post box. And then a couple of days later, or 3 weeks later as it is now, whatever, it turns up on someone's doorstep at the other end of the country.
That's quite... Are we just getting lazy, David? I mean, you're leader of the Heritage Party, so presumably you like tradition.
I love tradition. I think they're wonderful. You know, I used to love writing letters and receiving letters back in the day before email, but email...
Are they all in green ink, David?
Yeah, right, exactly. No, I love Christmas cards and getting them. I mean, what I tend to do now is just send them out and give them out to people in my immediate locality, you know, my neighbours and so on. People.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah, and I get some back from them. But I have a huge Christmas card list for people all around the country, but I just haven't got around to it this year.
See, I don't even really know my neighbours.
It's very difficult, you know, so I would do it. It's just, I have been lazy myself. I mean, guilty as charged. So next year I'm going to have to make a bit of an effort.
But look, Chris and Georgina, who presumably are a couple, they say they've had 63 cards and counting. You must be very, very popular. Please do let me know who they were all from. Friends, family, perhaps your church community, perhaps your religious community, work community, who knows. Peter says, hello, Emily. My wife and myself send and receive about 80 cards. Long may the simple Christmas cards survive. I do remember I did write them as a child, but since I've grown up, I just don't. Yeah, to be honest, it's just complete laziness. I could if I wanted to. I could if I wanted to. Sending a quick WhatsApp is so easy, though, isn't it? Anne says, bar humbug to those too lazy to write and send Christmas cards. Are we just lazy?
I think that's part of it.
Like me.
I think that's part of it. I think technology, to a certain degree, has made us lazy. I think people have become so accustomed to sending emails, sending WhatsApp messages, being on Facebook and Twitter and so on. They see that now as their normal method of communication. It's very rare, I think, nowadays for people to actually write a letter with their own hand. And, you know, you can see that in terms of some of the shocking handwriting that you see of people today, because they're clearly not used to it. But yeah, I think this is a tradition worth fighting for. As I said, the idea that you can write your own personal message in a card, you can send it to the other end of the country, someone picks it up, it means something.
We should have a campaign to bring back the Christmas card next year, when hopefully the posties won't be striking next year. I'm really sorry, but we're going to have to finish there. Thank you very much. Paul Embry, of course, trade unionist, firefighter and author, and David Curtin, who is the leader of the Heritage Party. I'll be back tomorrow, actually. I'm presenting Neil Oliver's show while he's up in Scotland, so I'll be back 6 till 8 p.m. I think we've got a lot of Christmas treats coming up tomorrow evening, so please do stay tuned if you're in front of your telly or your radio. That's goodbye for now.
Good evening, I'm Alex Deakin. This is your latest weather update from the Met Office. It's going to be a mild, often blustery Christmas weekend with some rain around, but by Boxing Day, it is going to turn colder once more. Here's the bigger picture. Low pressure dominating. This weather front has made for a very wet day for some, and that rain now creeping its way